and been doing that for way too long. It's over 15 years now that I've been a part of that. So I've learned a lot about water, and I really have. And thanks to all of the folks that participate in this group, I've really broadened that knowledge. So that's me. So Andy, Otto, who is the executive director of the the Santa Fe Watershed Association. Yeah, we expanded your role. Now you're New Mexico, not just Santa Fe. So Andy, why don't you say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm executive director of the Santa Fe Watershed Association and have been since 2014. I followed Felicity Brennan, who taught me everything I know about watersheds in Santa Fe and the world.
Now we'll go to Felicity. Felicity is the co-chair of this group and has been ever since we started, and is, as Andy indicated, a former executive director of the Santa Fe Watershed Association and a community activist, always involved in a whole lot of different things. So Felicity?
Well, that about covers it, I would say. All things water and culture. Yeah. Thank you.
Jennifer Lindleine, who is a professor at the Highlands University and has been very active in helping us figure out things about water issues. She's had some of her students, at least one student did a year-long study of the Santa Fe River, which is added to our information base. So Jennifer, you want to talk a little bit about yourself?
Well, you just said a lot. Hey, so I'm Jennifer Lindleine. I'm a professor of geology at New Mexico Highlands University and chair of the Natural Resources Management Department. And I really appreciate the mission and values of this group. And I just like to follow you guys and support where I can with my knowledge or with student participation. Thank you.
Marjorie, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, my name's Marjorie Sweet. I owned and operated a small farm in Albuquerque in the South Valley from 2011 to 2019. And now I live up here in Santa Fe. I work for a nonprofit farm north of here. And so I've been engaged kind of in all things food and agriculture, which obviously is all about water use. And I'm good friends with Bobby's daughter, and that's what led me to your group. And I hope I can support and help in any way.
Welcome aboard. And I'm a North Valley boy of Albuquerque, so I'm on the other side of the valley. So anyway, welcome aboard. We look forward to you being part of the group. Thank you. Let's see, William. Me is the president of the Agua Fria Village Association, and does a whole lot of other stuff. So go ahead, William.
Oh gosh, thank you, Carl. But much like yourself, I've been, in the Agua Fria Village politics and community service for, many, many years. And this year I actually told them when I reach 65, I'm going to retire. So we need to get some younger people in these organizations. So because I also do our Acequia Association and our Agua Fria Well Owners Association.
Thank you. Hey, Patrick Longmire, who's with the New Mexico Environment Department, please, let's hear about you.
My background is in aqueous chemistry, master's and doctorate degree, and about 42 years of experience, about a total of 13 years at the New Mexico Environment Department, 22 years at LANL in the chemistry and earth science group, and several universities and consulting companies. And I pretty much focus on groundwater background and contaminant transport, fate and transport studies.
You play a pretty good mandolin. What is your music instrument?
Well, I'm still working because I haven't heard from Eric Clapton yet to replace him. So, but I play a guitar. And my mentor is Django Reinhardt, if that name is familiar to anybody. That goes back to the 30s to the 50s.
Thanks, Patrick.
Swing.
Yeah. Next is Aaron English, and an Agua Fria resident and a wonderful new addition to our group. So, Aaron?
Yeah, great. So I'm an engineer and with a background in chemical engineering with biohabitats. I've been here in Santa Fe for 15, 16 years. And my specialty is wastewater treatment using natural systems, including constructed wetlands. And I think my first work with the river, aside from living in Agua Fria Village along the river here for almost 15 years, was the Living River Ordinance, which I helped the city develop and got to know Felicity through that, I believe. And that was back a decade ago or something at this point, but got to kind of dig in on that one a bit.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder, how are you doing? Good to see you. You're on mute.
Good morning, Carl and everybody. So thank you for having me. I'm the Water Resources Coordinator for Santa Fe, for the city. We're embarking on a few new things I want to share today with you. One of is we're revisiting and redoing the Santa Fe Basin study to reassess with the new climate models what the climate change effects are going to be out 80 years onto the city's water supply sources. Also leading up a wellhead protection program and aquifer management and sustainability project focus on water quality and sustainable aquifer yields. And then lastly, I'm responsible for the management of the city of San Juan Chama water supply and working with the community and others to try to maximize, which includes ways to maybe develop alternatives to reuse that water that effectively comes out as effluent at the Paseo Real. So, which obviously many people on this group are very interested in hearing more about.
All right, thank you, Bill. Rachel, welcome. Nice to see you again. You're on mute. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I was on my phone. It should work.
Now we can't hear you again. Okay, we lost you, Rachel. Okay. Did we lose Rachel? Okay.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Wow. Yes.
Okay. I know what happened on phone, switch computer.
They're
so
cutting out too.
Oh, I'll try again later.
Okay.
Okay.
Zoe, I don't know who you are, but welcome aboard. Are you with the girls' school?
I am not. I'm with the city of Santa Fe.
Okay.
I am in the River and Watershed section. Melissa
Excellent.
McConnell was promoted to the River and Watershed manager, and I am filling in her old position. I'm formerly of the River Commission, so I am familiar with the issues of the river. My background is in mining reclamation and water resources. I was with the state of New Mexico Mining and Minerals Division, and I think Felicity, you and I know each other from that role, and so I have a lot of kind of interconnected connections with people on this committee, but right now I am here as a representative of the city of Santa Fe.
Thank you very much. Welcome aboard.
Congratulations on your new role. That's excellent.
Thanks, Felicity.
Yeah, great.
And you want to go next? Morning. Jen?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear it. Hi, I'm Jen Pills. I'm the Wild Rivers Program Director at Wild Earth Guardians and also the Rio Grande Waterkeeper. You may know Galen. He was the Rio Grande campaigner until recently, and then he jettison to Alaska to go have a new adventure. So we're actually rehiring that position. I've been working with Guardians since 2013. I'm a lawyer and also a biologist, and I've been working on and following up on some of the stuff Galen has been doing with the city of Santa Fe, and trying to understand what's going on with new water development. And so Andy asked me if I would want to join this group. And so thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, welcome aboard. This is really, you're a welcome addition to the group. David, you want to give us a little insight into who you are and what you're doing? Can't hear you. You're on mute.
Dave Grenfell. I'm an anthropologist. A long time ago was with the Santa Fe Watershed Association. Now I've been upgraded to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've been upgraded to resident ethicist for this group. That is to say that my interest is on how we want to use our water and using an ethics frame to help with the decision making around those questions. I'll leave it there.
Fascinating. And Mr. Munzberger, been ages since we've seen you. How you doing? You're on mute, dude. Mute.
Okay, the unmute button.
You're unmuted. We can hear you now.
Unfortunately for you all. Good morning, fellow collaborators. Nice to see a lot of new faces with a lot of varied experiences. I'm a 8th generation resident of the village of La Bajada, the tailbone of the Santa Fe River watershed. And so we're all very interested. I'm also the chairman of the Traditional Village Committee and a commissioner on the Acequia, on the La Bajada Community Ditch and Mutual Domestic Water Association. So we're very concerned about the current state of the effluent and all the reports we've been receiving on the NIPD's violations from the plant. And so as we've been getting it in bits and pieces, looking forward to today getting some kind of a bigger, more holistic picture of as we end our irrigation season, of what's been going on, previously throughout the summer and all that. So thanks for making this forum available, and thanks everyone for attending in this manner. Nice to see so much interest in the traditional communities' sustainability along the Santa Fe River, and we here in La Bajada appreciate that.
I don't want to forget Alex. So Alex, you want to thank you, Darren. Good to see you for sure. Alex?
Yes. I'm
Morning.
sorry, I popped off here for a second. I was actually trying to speak to somebody on the phone. Are we done with introductions?
No, we'd like to hear a little bit about you.
Okay, I'm Alex Mcglissie. I am the environmental compliance officer with the city of Santa Fe for a short period more. I've been interacting with the La Cienega traditional communities for a couple of years now, and mostly on wastewater issues and other groundwater issues. I was actually trying to get some information for you, Carl, on those PFAS samples, and that's why I had to get off the phone.
All right, well, good to hear from you. Patricio?
Yes.
Morning. Did I miss you?
No, you cut. I think you meant Patricia Dominguez.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Patricia, would you introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Patricia Dominguez. I work for Senator Heinrich here in his Santa Fe office. I'm just getting back out into the community as we've kind of come to terms with doing the Zoom thing and not meeting in person anymore. So I'm happy to reacquaint myself with the group and happy to just get an update of what's happening today. The agenda has a lot of interesting items. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Austin, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, how's it going? My name's
Good,
Austin.
how are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm a master's student at New Mexico Highlands University. I'm just starting my
Excellent.
master's, and I'm also a treatment operator in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And I'm deciding on a master's thesis at the moment now with the help of Bill Schneider and Dr. Lindleine.
Excellent.
And we'll see what we're going to do somewhere in the Santa Fe region.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I
Thank
think
you.
that's everybody, I believe.
Bobby, Basold.
Who?
Bobby?
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I'm Bobby Basold. I'm an artist and activist. I walked the length of the Santa Fe River in 2012 with 2 other artists. We have a website. It created a sense of knowledge about the Santa Fe River because for going from the upper watershed to the Rio Grande in 5 days consecutively put a lot of wisdom into our feet about our river. And prior to that, I have curated exhibits about water. Water is a main issue in my work. And I do a lot of learning. So anyway, thank you, everyone. I'm so really glad to be here.
Okay. This is number one. I want to stop for a second. This is such an amazing collection of people and knowledges, and it's very impressive, I think. Anyway, what I'd like to do is I want to change some of the agenda items. I know Aaron's got to leave us at 11 o'clock, so I'd like to move up the next steps on the constructed treatment wetlands to begin. Then we'll have Bill follow that, and then Patrick after that, if that's all right with everybody. Okay.
One quick thing, Carl, too, I forgot to mention, because Alex always asks me, yes, we are recording this. So know that. And what we do with the recordings, we plot them on our website, santafewatershed.org. So if you want to go back and see past ones or this one in a few days there. And Alex, this is being recorded. So if you want to not let us see you, that's fine. And we do not drive Subarus in the upper watershed.
Okay, so let's talk about the constructed treatment wetlands a little bit, because I thought that our last meeting, we really had some significant insight into something that may be really possible for the Santa Fe River, and something that would be, I think, a real godsend in terms of helping the river become healthy again. And so, Aaron, you and I have had some kind of informal discussions about what the next steps would be, but would you go into that a little bit and talk to us about what the next steps you would see as far as moving this project forward?
Great. So back in August at the last one of these meetings, for those of you who were here and those who weren't, I did give a presentation around the technology of constructed wetlands for management of wastewater. And in this case, for the potential, maybe, for them to be applicable here as a ecological buffer between the discharge of the treatment plant and the river itself. And part of, I think, the reason I was invited here, to give this talk back in August, and part of, I think, that the genesis of that is that there has been some water quality challenges within the treatment plant, and that there's very little modulation then of that discharge quality before it hits the river channel. And because the river is dry most of the time, this is unusual for a surface water discharge plant. These do exist in the Southwest, but otherwise very rare to discharge. Like the only water in the river is the effluent, right? So there is no dilution. Most surface water discharges from municipal facilities are put into rivers or whatever, where you have the opportunity for mixing and dispersion and less impact. And in this case, we don't have that because all of the water in the river, pretty much from the treatment plant down, is recycled wastewater, treated wastewater. So, so the stakes are higher, and the treatment plant therefore must provide, much more consistent, water quality discharge, and ideally also be addressing contaminants of emerging concern like drugs and antibiotics, and also hitting its nutrient and removal targets for things like pathogens. So this is a classic place where a treatment wetland could become useful to at least take some or all of that effluent and help buffer it, ecologically speaking, before it goes back into the river channel. And that has been done. I shared a few examples of that happening in Arcata. California is probably the most famous example. It's been in place for 30 years or something. The city of Arcata discharges to the estuary there, but they go through a bunch of treatment wetlands and ponds. And then a more recent example was one of the ones we built in Oregon outside of Portland, about 90 acres of treatment wetlands to buffer a municipal wastewater treatment system, about 5 to 15 million gallons a day. So all of that is good. Technology is good, but there are challenges, I think, here in that we have the question of water rights, because wetlands themselves, use some water, they evaporate water. So I think there's a water rights question. There's a point of compliance question, because where the treatment plant's compliance and discharge monitoring reports is measured is important. After the treatment wetlands, you'd probably have to re-disinfect to make sure that birds and other critters who are going to love this place don't contribute, additional coliforms or whatever. So there's some technical challenges there to understanding that feasibility. The question we had was land availability. How much space is there? Does the city own the land or could acquire the land for that? And part of all of those things come together into the question I was discussing with Carl is the political will there, or the interest there? And to answer that question, that's not something I can answer, but part of what I think is interesting about this group as a potential next step is that treatment wetlands provide a whole lot of other benefit to a community. And oftentimes that is one of the main reasons why people consider these, beyond just the ecological filtration and buffering. And I would say that if we were even going to think about something like that for Santa Fe, we would really want to have these other elements, such as expanding, the habitat value, potentially expanding the groundwater recharge value of those, which may or may not fit with the river's goals. Looking at the recreational value and the, creating, a place, a park, really beautiful place where people could come and enjoy that. And there's a restorative aspect too, even though this is a constructed system. I think there is some evidence that this river would have had these kind of floodplain wetlands. And so are we able to also kind of help repair the hydrology of the river, of which I'm not an expert. But so to me, those are the pieces that form part of that political will beyond just like hitting your discharge monitoring reports. And it's not like just a silver bullet. Wetlands have benefits and they have challenges. And so I think, understanding those and establishing a feasibility assessment might be an additional step on the technical side that could inform the political side. And then there's always the funding question. And one of the things that we are watching, and it probably does depend on the outcomes of the election, is that there hopefully will be some additional investment in green infrastructure, nature-based solutions that are looking at climate and water quality and habitability around infrastructure. And so if this is the kind of project that could get itself close to being shovel ready, the question is, would there be some funding mechanisms available in the coming year or two, in an infrastructure bill that this might be well suited for? We are seeing communities get, nice financial packages for these nature-based solutions. And so, yeah, so to me, it's the next steps are, exploring a bit more the feasibility, understanding the political will and the mechanisms there, and then looking if there is a funding pathway that could be prepared.
That's excellent. So to me, there's like two fronts. One is the political will, and we need to have the city involved and get their support. There's also going to be some resistance from the locals. And I'll tell you why, because obviously I've been a resident of La Cienega for now 35 years. And there's real sensitivity when you start to talk about bringing in more public people, more people coming to this place. And the problem is that the people who have lived there for a long time, I mean, we're talking at, like 10, 12 generations. Jose Varela Lopez is an example. They have had to deal with trespassers and problems with people abusing their lands. And so there's a real resistance to some degree to when you mention a trail system. They don't want a trail coming anywhere near their property. I think that can be done. So these are just things I think on a local level that need to be addressed. And there's ways that we can help as the La Cienega Valley Association. We have a newsletter. And so in my head, I'm already starting to put together something that we put in our newsletter to let people know that this is something that could be coming their direction so we can gain their support. And what's interesting about the particular piece of property, it connects to Santa Fe County open space. And so there's really an avenue, I think, that would be able to really create a beautiful spot, a beautiful walking area, bird viewing, those kinds of things. And so that's one side of it. The other side is the city side. And to me, I'm hopeful that the Santa Fe River Commission will become supportive of this and take take our case directly to the city council at some point. Certainly, I think that we would be in a position to participate in any way we can to help make that happen. But obviously, if we can get those things done, that in my mind forms the foundation of really starting to do something that may really happen.
Hey, Carl, Bill Schneider here.
Sure.
To that point, I mean, I think there's a third element too, which is, we have competing principles in many respects between the desire to build wetlands, and certainly the case can be made. They bring an incredible amount of value on many levels, but the effects it has on delivering water to the downstream users for the irrigators. And so it's something I struggle with on our return flow pipeline. So I just wanted to acknowledge that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And something we have to take into consideration for sure.
This is Darren Munzberg. If I could add to what Mr. Schneider is saying, I think there's something that Ms. English brings up too, is I think political will, where it can be found, is going to be based in respect for traditional uses. So it may be, we've been through this very recently in the last 15 years, where wetland restoration projects have gone, awry. And I think it's because what sometimes we miss is that we're not looking at a Catskill style watershed or a Cascade style watershed. And we have to be really sensitive to more than experience we've had in those types of environments to what a sustainable watershed looks like in an upper Sonoran transition savanna. It doesn't look anything like what a sustainable watershed looks like in the Pacific Northwest or back east. And we found that over the last 400 years, what keeps that river system sustainable is management of the traditional uses, particularly agriculture and grazing. And there's a place for that. So we just have to be really careful, I think. And I know that that's the consideration down here among my neighbors too, because we've done this once before, at least. I mean, really, we've been doing it in different versions since the 1930s with the Soil Conservation Service and the Bureau of Reclamation. And it's one of the reasons I'm encouraged to see all this other interdepartmental, interjurisdictional, interdisciplinary experience in the collaborative right now, because it kind of assures me that we may not reinvent the wheel. We may actually make some progress, but I think what we do have to keep in mind is 400 years worth of lessons in sustainability, and look back at our traditional uses and see what we were doing right before we've had these last couple of, sort of botched experiments, But I think that's where political will lies in the traditional communities. It's not so much, ingress of outsiders through trails and open space and that. I think it really comes down to respect for traditional use and for the very columnar, the very vital, fundamental, fundamental aspects of grazing and agriculture in a living river system here.
Could I ask a question about hydrology, since it's not my field, but what's below the wetland, the proposed wetland area? Presumably there's an aquifer there. What's the connectivity with what would be the value of recharging the aquifer using the wetlands? Or is the aquifer a candidate for water storage from the water treatment plant before it gets pumped up to the Buckman treatment plant?
Boy, is that a great question. One of the things that the thing about this area, because of the volcanic activity a million years ago, is there's all kinds of almost basalt barriers and things that are created. And as we were talking, I was just thinking it would be really nice to get maybe at our next meeting to have the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources talk about what we're looking at underground, because it is complex. In our community, you can have great water, at one property, you go 100 feet away and there's nothing. And so those are the kinds of questions. I think that's a great question, is whether or not that could be used to help store water. That'd be really cool. But
yeah. And on the flip side of that, though, I do want to point out that these treatment wetlands sometimes are built with the ability for infiltration, but more often than not, they're actually lined with either a clay liner to reduce, that movement of water, or synthetic geosynthetic liners, so that they're actually kind of contained units. And, those are all options here, because if you don't want to do infiltration, to the point of allowing as much water to continue downstream to support those traditional uses, then you wouldn't want to do recharge. But, they can be configured in a variety of ways, is my point.
Customized. This is all good stuff. So, so I'm just wondering what should be our next steps? Any suggestions?
Well, I'll chime in that the city has about $16 million earmarked for upgrades to improve the water quality on the treatment at the wastewater plant, new aeration basins, new filters, new UV. And so would if the community pushed for an additional treatment step of these constructed wetlands, would that be something that the city would entertain? And if there's value, and it certainly, I think the community wants it, and it's effective at serving the purpose and the objective, I could see the benefit. Again, if the downstream users also sort of felt as though that we can all coexist. And I think that's going to be the challenge.
So Bill, how do we get that moving to the city? Do we need to create a proposal? What do we need to do in terms of outreach to our communities? What do we need to do, Bill?
I'm thinking, Bobby, there's probably several ways that could be achieved, probably on multiple fronts. And I think under the leadership of this group is probably the best, but I think we need a proposal. Everything in terms of cost, there's the land use question and all these other issues that have been brought forth. So I don't know if I have a really clear answer for you, Bobby, on the next steps. I think really ultimately, if we had a proposal in hand to roll into our CIP, I think it's something that could be sort of explored. I just can't make promises I can't keep. I just don't know. What are we talking about in terms of land acquisition and construction costs, for example?
All of that stuff needs to be addressed. I think what we're saying is we really need to develop a strategy to approach this for sure. Yeah, so they could be included in the city's capital improvement planning. So maybe, Andy, is this something that would be appropriate for the educational committee?
Yeah, and my notion is too, and I'll throw it out to Zoe and to Rachel, that I think the River Commission, City River Commission, could be a way to introduce it into the city docket, shall we say. And so combination of Santa Fe River Traditional Communities Collaborative working with the River Commission to develop a resolution, if you will, to get the political will of the city along with it. And then the other one who's not here today is the county, getting the county involved. Yeah. But I will say, and maybe Bill and Alex or Zoe, the city water utility is embarking on a new plan starting next week, working with the county to help develop strategic plan, water plan. And maybe this could be something brought in there.
That would be ideal. What do you think, Bill?
That's a great suggestion. And when I was going to give my little 5-minute overview, I was going to mention that, Andy. So thank you.
Well, you get to do the details, Bill. I just do the overview.
Okay, so I think that, do we want to discuss this any further? I think I can write up some notes and basically capture what we're talking about. And I think it is time to bring it forward and push on this a little bit and see how far we get.
Let me just jump in quickly. So I didn't realize that there were major upgrades planned to the wastewater treatment plant. Shouldn't this proposal for a constructed wetland be discussed as part of the design process for the upgrades to the treatment plant, and look for other nature-based solutions, maybe in other phases of treatment? Or is that opening up too many cans of worms?
Now, the folks from the wastewater treatment plant, Mike and Efren, aren't here today because they have a full day training somewhere, and so we're missing them. And they'll make a complete presentation of those kinds of upgrades that you're talking about at our next meeting. It's already planned. And so, yeah, you're right. Those are the kinds of things that we need to look at, is the total idea of how we treat water and how we process it. This just feels, again, this feels good. I feel like we're making some progress. This is something that's been challenging for all of us for a long time. And so I think we have an opportunity to do something positive. Let me put together some notes. Felicity and I will put together some notes and we'll get it out to everybody, and we'll see if we can't get this thing moving, and maybe even be able to set some timeframes in terms of how we want to approach the city. So I think, yes, go ahead.
Alex might have something to offer about what David just suggested. Alex, is that something you could comment on as a possibility?
I actually was going to. He's totally right in that the upgrades that are necessary to meet the new nutrient limits for the Santa Fe River are going to have to be studied in detail with respect to whether or not those improvements, including a constructed wetland for treatment, would be able to actually meet the new limits. And I'm gonna say up front that we're looking at some pretty stringent limits that might only be achievable through mechanical treatment. And so it would have to be something that was looked at in the redesign of the the wastewater treatment plant processes, and the final negotiation that occurs between the city and the New Mexico Environment Department on a standard, a temporary standard, because right now the city is working with the Environment Department to agree upon a standard that will not only protect the stream, but be achievable. Because I think I have mentioned this once before, some of the current limits that are being proposed or are being considered by the Environment Department would only be achieved through reverse osmosis. And you don't want to put reverse osmosis on a wastewater treatment plant, on the effluent from a wastewater treatment plant, nor discharge reverse osmosis treated water into a stream where it's most likely going to rip up the biologic environment. It's very highly aggressive water, basically has nothing in it. And so NMED, EPA, and the city are now talking about a provision in their water quality standards that allows for a temporary standard to be implemented. And so you'll hear more about this from the wastewater treatment folks, but what's being proposed is what EPA is calling a life cycle analysis that takes a look at cost, benefit, and term in terms of what is the cost to the city and to the people of Santa Fe, what is the benefit to the environment, but also what are the impacts to the environment. For example, if we implemented reverse osmosis, number one, it's not the best water to treat back, to send back to the environment. Number two, you have a brine that has to be disposed of, and so you have an environmental insult there. You have trucking of that brine that has to be achieved. So they're looking at what they call the carbon footprint, the environmental footprint of all these processes. And hopefully what's agreed upon is some treatment process that can achieve benefits to the Santa Fe River, but at the same time, not cost the city $90 million, $100 million, while resulting in other harm to the environment. And so EPA is going to hire a contract to do that life cycle analysis. And the results of that study would be presented to the city, and then discussion would occur on whether or not it's an acceptable level for the city and for EPA and the state. And they may choose some interim, some level of treatment that may not achieve the nutrient values that NMED has derived for the Santa Fe River, but would get close enough to them to have benefits to the river, but not be overwhelmingly expensive, both in terms of construction and operation. RO is not cheap to operate. And I keep bringing up RO because that is what EPA and the state of New Mexico have decided would be necessary right now to meet some of the proposed standards. So sorry for the long explanation, but basically the city is entering into this study with EPA and NMED called the life cycle analysis. They'll basically come up with a treatment level that's achievable, and then negotiate a temporary standard for the Santa Fe River that would take all of this into account.
Okay, Alex,
yes,
a couple of things. One is, doesn't reverse osmosis use a whole lot of water, and then there is like waste involved in that?
Yeah.
That's what you were saying.
Yes, and that's one of the things that will be looked at in life cycle analysis is the fact it not only uses, basically we have the water, we're going to push the water through reverse osmosis, but it uses a lot of electricity, a lot of energy, and it produces a brine, a very concentrated brine, treatment brine that is high in salts, but also high in other things such as metals. It basically concentrates everything in the water.
Right. So then how is it possible to get the city to look at the constructed wetland as a possibility in NMED and instead of the reverse osmosis and so on?
it could be one of the treatment technologies that is proposed by the city and EPA to be considered in the life cycle analysis. So, for example, membrane bioreactors was one of the treatment technologies considered. They're effective at removing nitrogen and phosphorus, probably not down to the levels that NMED standards dictate right now, but perhaps that constructed wetlands can be a polishing step that's considered along with MBRs. And EPA can evaluate that as part of their life cycle analysis.
Okay.
It can be brought up, and it probably will be. I mean, they may look at MBRs plus some sort of chemical precipitation as a form of treatment, but wetland polishing can also, I'll call it polishing, but wetland treatment can also be considered as a feasible alternative.
But it sounds like there's just a lot of options and things that we can consider. But yeah, there are a whole lot of different things or approaches that seems to be able to address those kinds of concerns. Erin, do you have any comment?
Yeah, so Alex, that's really interesting information because it sounds like if they're looking at RO, the discharge requirements are very stringent. And I'm going to guess partly triggered by dissolved solids. Is that right? Concern about TDS?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's salts, right? So the river gets salt in it because it's our wastewater. We contribute that salt when we use that water, when we urinate. So that's part of like the unnatural cycle that we have at hand here with this river. It's that it goes into Santa Fe literally and then out. And so the salt it's a big problem, and it's a consistent problem, and it's unfortunately not one that wetlands will solve. And in fact, they can kind of make it worse because they can evaporate water and therefore concentrate those levels of salt. So I think that's what I was referring to earlier, is that there are some challenges too with using treatment wetlands, and they have to be understood holistically, right? They're not a silver bullet. But, you know, yeah, and I know NMED, and I've worked with enough groundwater discharge permits where even that is a concern, right? Discharge of salt, which is inherent to wastewater. So it will be interesting, and the levels set by EPA and NMED for the city of Santa Fe will dictate, you know, what that technology likely looks like. But I would say certainly reverse osmosis for a river discharge would be pretty extraordinary. And hopefully you don't have to go down that path, because of the carbon footprint of that alone is just astronomical. But it does impact the traditional uses downstream because you've got salt in the water, right? And you've got that same thing in the river channel and all of the ecology and the life that's supported by it. So I think, you know, these are complex issues, and I would certainly think that putting a treatment wetland either in a polishing stage, probably right about that, Alex, into that EPA process for looking at the life cycle would be really wise. And where we have seen them be successful and be embraced is because they can often cut your carbon footprint down significantly. But, you know, an MBR, you know, has a certain capacity, certain things it can do, right? And treatment wetlands are a little more open and wild. And so it just, you know, looking without having seen those standards or knowing what you're negotiating now, I think being able to get that consideration into the life cycle process would be really good and help, you know, kind of underpin what is and is not feasible here.
Agree. I think the idea is maybe that's something that I believe they're going to be using a company called the Environmental Resources Group, and to get that into their different treatment schemes that could be examined is the key to this, because, you know, there's a number of different combinations that have already been looked at by Carollo, our engineer, and some of them, it did look at RO in terms of cost and in terms of the modifications that would have to be made, and it was looked at by EPA in the early phases of this nutrients negotiation, and both figures came out somewhere around $80, $90 to $100 million for that, and that's just to get it going. No one's talking about operating costs and waste disposal costs, because brine like that would probably have to be put into an underground injection well. And there's going to be a number of permit requirements, and plus you're injecting this into a possible area where you could have groundwater contamination. Obviously, the UIC permit would address that, but nobody really wants to go in that route. And so they're looking at MBR plus additional treatment. Could it meet it by chemical precipitation? Maybe wetlands is another thing that could be considered. But my understanding is that, and I was going to ask this earlier, the wetlands we're talking about are treatment wetlands, and they're not necessarily wetlands that would be created below what we would call the footprint of the wastewater treatment plant.
I think that's open for discussion, right? I'm just from a technology perspective, which is really all I can bring to this conversation, is that they could be either. And it kind of depends on what that community want is. But yes, they can be configured as treatment elements, and they also can be configured as ecological buffer between a treatment plant discharge and a river.
Okay.
Okay. Wow. All right. So I'm gonna get. We need.
Yeah, I have to run to another meeting, but
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. Appreciate it. I'll put together some notes, and obviously, as you said, this is a complex issue, and we'll work through the complexity and figure things out. But thank you so much for being here today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Aaron.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bill, you're up next.
Thank you. We got to remind ourselves that, constructing any type of wetlands on airport property will definitely trigger the FAA. So we have other challenges.
Yeah.
So I presume, Carl, given the time's 11, do I only have 5 minutes?
No, just start and go, and we'll figure stuff out.
Is it possible that you could allow me to share screen so I could pull up a couple of graphics, or is that unacceptable?
That's up to Andy.
Excuse me. Yeah, I set the meeting up so that you can grab the screen. You should be able to now.
Okay.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, just give me 1 second, please, and I'll be prepared to do that. Here we go. Okay, thank you, everybody. Again, lot of great issues here, and I do think there's a lot of potential win-wins, solutions that recognize historical, cultural, environmental, and water supply uses within the river watershed. So to that point, I pull up on my screen, hopefully you could see, is an invitation. I'll email it to Andy and Carl to distribute to the group if you haven't already received it. Is the city is preparing a water, along with the county, a water planning effort. And so we're gonna have 2 meetings in October on the 19th, the 20th, and then smaller breakout groups subsequent in the following week. Would love to get people to participate. I heard somebody mention about values and ethics of water for all those concerns and objectives. So now's the time for the city to sort of try to understand people's needs, concerns, wants, and values, basically. So I will forward this to the group. I have a piece of good news to share, Carl and group. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to show something else. All right. Having some operator difficulty here. Bear one second, please. All right, here we go. Sorry, it seems to be a lag, Andy. My apologies. So one of the things that we're evaluating, so this ties to the objectives that what Carl asked me to speak about, is the city's intentions to evaluate through an engineering design as well as an environmental impacts assessment under NEPA, what would be considerations necessary if the city were, and that's a big if, to pursue with its intents to construct a return flow pipeline to the Rio Grande for the intents and purposes of rediverting its effluent that is proportioned to its San Juan Chama water. And I've given a couple high-level overviews to this group. In the past, I recognize as many that are very much opposed to this project. We're trying to engage the community, understand the values, and see if we can incorporate and address everybody's needs. Obviously, the city's water division has the need to provide water supply in a changing climate with the risk of fire, extreme drought, what have you. We have basically, as part of this preparation for embarking on NEPA, and when will that process happen? Probably early in January. We're really trying to make sure we have sufficient information available that address the concerns of the community. And towards that end, we're preparing a very comprehensive hydrology of the lower Santa Fe River report. And what that will do is synthesize 50 years of information on the lower Santa Fe River from effectively the Paseo Real all the way to the Rio Grande. And it's going to share and illustrate to the best of our ability with the information we have, historic changes, water budgets for the various sub-reaches of the watershed, try to estimate diversions, the effects of groundwater pumping, etc. I think it'll really be a body of knowledge that will help all of us make informed decisions. Again, I recognize the return flow pipeline is very controversial to this group. And we're hoping ultimately through mitigation and other measures that there effectively are ways to improve some of the challenges that we face on the lower Santa Fe River. So with that, I guess I'll stand for any questions.
Okay, one of the questions I think everybody has is how much of the flow out of the wastewater treatment plant into the river will be reduced? How much will it be reduced by?
Yeah, and certainly that's dependent on how much San Juan Chama water that we're bringing in through the Buckman direct diversion. I could pull up a slide. Let me see here that could illustrate that a little better. So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's basically a series of bar graphs. So what this illustrates, if you can see the y-axis, is basically the annual discharge of the plant, the Paseo Real, going back to basically when the Buckman well field came online. And so historically in the early 70s, it was roughly around 3,000 acre feet. And you see basically up through the 90s and at peak in 1995, where it was almost 6,500 acre feet, that the city has been feeding, and I guess this comes back to that comment of values, imported water into the lower Santa Fe River Basin, either through pumping of the Buckman wells, or since 2011, when the Buckman direct diversion came online and we started utilizing our San Juan Chama water, as everyone here knows, originates in the Colorado River Basin. And so the city's goals, and I'm going to get to your answer to your question, Carl, is that we would like to maximize the imported water to its fullest optimized extent so that we can reserve native water to the Santa Fe River Basin for the entire sort of all these uses that we've sort of been discussing. So to your point, I'm going to pull up a slide that sort of illustrates, since the Buckman direct diversion came online, the Paseo Real has been basically putting about 4,500 acre feet on average, and this is annually, into the system. But if you look under this line, this more or less illustrates the components of that effluent. So roughly half of our water that comes out of that pipe on average is originated from San Juan Chama water. And then there's a small portion that is Buckman well water. These two colors sort of reflect basically imported water. we're proposing is to divert this basically dark blue. So you're looking at basically under these concepts of basically rediverting about half of the current flows. Now, one thing I will bring to people's attention is this. Here we go, same timeline, 2013, 2014, 2015. This is a comparative of natural flows going into the Chlor Reservoir that Mother Nature provides through snowmelt primarily, compared to the Paseo Real releases. And so basically 7 out of the past 8 years, the city's put significantly more water into the lower Santa Fe River than what has flown in naturally from snowmelt into the Santa Fe River. So again, I think everyone recognizes an unnatural system. We have competing needs, and we're really effectively trying to do our best to satisfy and meet all those needs. So hopefully, Carl, that answers your question.
Yeah, you did, and brings up obviously a whole host of other issues. I mean, one of our ongoing concerns is just the management of that wetlands area, and how it has not been managed. And obviously, Beaver got in there, and then it really cut off all the water for their downstream farmers. Really hit La Bajada hard. I mean, I don't know how many years they didn't have water. And then there's another contributing thing that obviously pertains to the community of La Cienega, and it's the springs in our area that have been diminished up to 50% over the last 40 years, sometimes even more than that. And that was obviously a source of water that helped the downstream farmers as well. And so there are a whole host of issues that we need to be addressing. And the La Cienega Valley Association certainly is making an attempt to address these concerns. There's 2 things I'll talk about real quickly, among others. One is we recently made an ICIP, Infrastructure and Capital Improvement Plan proposal to bring in county water to Upper La Cienega. We know this isn't going to be a quick process, but if we can start to take people off wells, we've had what we call the lot split subdivision, almost between 400 and 500 homes that have been added in the last 40 years, and they all have wells. And so if we can start to, and we have the La Cienega watershed conditions that require those people to go off wells and onto the county system when it becomes available. So we've started that process. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the El Dorado wells. The production wells in El Dorado have a direct impact on our springs. They're one of the sources of water comes from that direction. And so we are in the process of making an attempt to get there's a new pipeline that's going to be going in through El Dorado that's going to go up to Canoncito County Waterline 12-inch. And we're hopeful that will be used in part to start to support the El Dorado subdivision. And they're thinking about drilling a new well. And there's actually locations that they can drill that would not impact our springs. So certainly we're going to make that effort. But getting back to this issue of reduced water, it really is a concern. Darren, I know that's going to be a concern for the folks down in La Bajada. And so it's just something we need to anticipate and try to figure out what that means in terms of the impact on farmers and ranchers below.
That's right, Carl. Thanks kind of for the segue, because I've been looking for a place to tie in what Aaron English was talking about earlier. And I think what Alex Mcglissie made kind of as clear as possible. There's a point of compliance, especially when we're talking about EPA. There's a point of compliance, and the city is the point of compliance. And yes, it's unfortunate for the city that it has so many responsibilities to manage. And I think the one thing to keep in mind, I know I'm saying it, William's thinking it from Agua Fria. I don't see Jose, but I know he's thinking it from Oaxaca. And then, you know, what it is that this collaborative in particular, one of its basic tenets was a commitment to flow in the Santa Fe River. So that does automatically set us up with a challenge of to figure out how we can assist and what we're going to support as a management remedy or a management program going forward. And I'm really encouraged to see solicitation from the county and the city together of participation in this at least 5-year planning. But we need to keep thinking about how we maintain flow in the river, and whether that's a remedy for maybe a few years of uncontrolled growth in Santa Fe. Okay, but now we do have the resources we have and we have to manage them. I would just like to reaffirm some consensus among this collaborative that one of the things that is a core of its center around which we collaborate is flow in that river, and for all the obvious reasons for the traditional communities, and going back again to sustainable agriculture. So that is ultimately, though, yeah, the city's responsibility. So them being in control of the waterworks upstream to the downstream users. So I'm glad to see at least the level of participation and the progress that's been made so far in bringing all the right people to the table. But I'm encouraged to see the study beginning. But I think, yeah, flow in the river is a really critical path consideration. Everything else kind of needs to be built around that, what we can do to support that, as opposed to rushing off to maybe one component of a bigger treatment plan. I think we should also be very vocally supportive of NMED's adjustment of those standards as well. Those may be artificially transposed to an environment that they're not necessarily applicable to. That's something that probably needs some greater inspection, some more thorough inspection, so we can see, are we rushing towards technologies like reverse osmosis that have all this other negative side effects, when really we don't have to treat that aggressively, if that's the case. So glad to see that at least some science is being put toward it. No.
Well said. So Bill, anything else?
No.
Go ahead, Bobby.
So Bill, how is the city dealing with the fact that there may not be San Juan Chama water? And if, and as I understand it, the pipeline is a done deal. It's going to happen, and no matter what, but to be discharging water into the Rio Grande when there may not be any water coming, any more water coming into the city from the San Juan Chama. I would really like to hear some, rather than, I would like to hear you discuss the climate crisis. Going back 50 years is a great thing. It's really good to see that history, but until you're looking at the long-term projection in terms of the science of climate in the Southwest and in the Santa Fe area, that's not helpful. I don't see that it's helpful. You've got to look ahead. And how are you looking ahead, Bill?
Yeah. Thank you, Bobby, and I share your concerns. So basically what the city will be doing is we are partnered with the Bureau of Reclamation, and we are embarking on 2 studies that are using state-of-the-art climate models. It's the CMET5 GCMs, and we are going to explore, and we're going to look through to year 2100. So it's an 80-year projection moving forward in 10-year decadal increments to look at the effects of climate change, not just on San Juan Chama water, but also native water in the Rio Grande, as well as the Santa Fe River. I will just respectfully disagree with you. The pipeline is far from a done deal. We have a lot of matters to address before that ever goes to council for approval. But aside from that, in the event, Bobby, that it's a doomsday scenario for the San Juan Chama project, in terms of drastic reductions on water supply, I think we also have to look inward as to what is the realities on the native water. because all the models show is the San Juans are less at risk than the Sangre de Cristos. So if it ever got that extreme, things are going to be very dire. And so that is why we're looking at other, what we call adaptation strategies. Aquifer storage and recovery is being one of them, one of many. Additional conservation. And we've been reserving our groundwater. And I could show you maps that are illustrating very dramatic recoveries and improvements on aquifer storage. That's back to the sustainable management strategy that I shared earlier. So again, we have all the same concerns that you do, quite frankly. So hopefully I addressed.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you, Bill. So I did understand from talking with the city, Jesse, and I can't think of his last name, and he did say that the pipeline's going to be built. The money's there, and they're going into the design phase. So tell me more, please.
Okay, so I'll clarify that, surely. So we're embarking on the next step. We have no authority to build a pipeline. What Resolution 201956 authorized the Water Division to do is complete three things: water planning, which we're committed to doing, the engineering design so that we can see if it's fully feasible. Can we construct a pipeline physically with all the rules under NEPA? And therefore, the third thing is, what are the environmental impacts? So all three of those things are underway. And only then can we make a determination, is the pipeline the right effective way to mitigate climate change and to maximize San Juan Chama water, to reserve native water for the future, as well as for all the demands on the river system that we've been discussing today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right, this will be a continuing conversation without question, but thank you so much for your presentation today. I think it's helpful. And I really appreciate the respect you're paying attention to the traditional uses of water, because that is obviously something that's very important to us. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now I'm going to lead into Patrick Longmire, who's going to talk about pharmaceuticals at the wastewater treatment plant. You ready, Patrick?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready, Carl. Thank you. So the work that I'm going to present, and Andy will do the share screen, is work that the New Mexico Environment Department performed in 2015, 16, and 17. And it was a reconnaissance to look at pharmaceuticals and personal care products and treated wastewater effluent at Los Alamos, the Rio Grande, north of Otto Bridge and south of Otto Bridge, and Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant. And so this is work that I presented at several other talks throughout the years. And I think everybody will find this very interesting. And so let's go to the next slide.
There we go.
There you go. So what we'll look at, and I won't turn this into a chemistry lecture, but with the pharmaceuticals and personal care products, if you understand what each molecule looks like and their chemical properties, are they soluble in water, or what's their relative solubility? That's very powerful information to determine, are they going to be mobile in a groundwater or an aquifer system. Then we'll look at the types and concentrations of pharmaceuticals, personal care products that we detected. We'll look at surface water, a little bit of groundwater at Los Alamos, and then a summary and conclusions. Okay, Andy. So I want to thank Los Alamos County, the city of Santa Fe, Alex, for giving us access to sample the effluents, the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant, city of Espanola, and Lindleine for allowing us to access sampling of these treated wastewater effluents. Next slide. This shows a Landsat image of the Espanola Basin. And you can see here the Valles Caldera there in Los Alamos. And the Rio Grande is identified where we're looking at the north part of this photo is the Rio Chama, the confluence with the Rio Grande, and then going south towards the community of La Bajada, and see the La Bajada basalt flows there. And the sources are the wastewater treatment plants. 3 of them in Los Alamos, one at Lannel, one in the Pueblo Canyon, which serves Los Alamos, and then the White Rock wastewater treatment plant. The northernmost one is Espanola, and then the southernmost one is the city of Santa Fe, their wastewater treatment plant. Next. So when we go out and sample for these types of emerging contaminants, we're looking at parts per trillion, really small levels. 1 part per trillion is equivalent to 1 second in 31,688 years. So we need a very specific, highly sensitive analytical method. And the EPA, part of their SW 846 analytical methods, 1694, basically is a high pressure liquid chromatography, mass spectrometry analytical method. And this is actually a method that's sort of similar for looking at PFAS, and polyfluoroalkyl substances, because you need to detect in the parts per trillion levels. And this analytical method has been developed for aqueous, solid, and biosolids. So when you go out and sample for pharmaceuticals, you don't want to be drinking coffee or just take your blood pressure medicine. You want to really think about how you're sampling, because you want to eliminate any false positives, and you want to be careful. So it's good to, before you go out and sample, kind of have a tailgate discussion on how you're going to do this, and really eliminate any introduction of these pharmaceuticals from the food you're eating or the fluids you're consuming at the time. And so this is a fairly robust method. Most analytical laboratories can perform this method. Okay, next slide. So here's kind of a list of what we are looking for. And I'll just go through this. Acetaminophen, that's in Tylenol. It's used as a pain reliever, fever reducer. It was first available or developed in 1950. And then in 1959, it was available over the counter. So OCT means over the counter, where the public could actually purchase these medications. Bisphenol A is a component in plastic and epoxy resins. It's ubiquitous. It's ubiquitous in the environment. And it was first available in 1957. Caffeine's been around for centuries, and where would we be without caffeine? And so caffeine, acetaminophen are 2 of the 3 major pharmaceuticals that we find, personal care products that we find in wastewater effluents, treated wastewater effluents. Another one is DEET, and this is an insect repellent. And then we get into some other, like diazepam or Valium, that's used for substance abuse recovery, trouble sleeping. That was available in 1963. Fluoxetine, which Prozac, an antidepressant, that was developed or available in 1986. Ibuprofen and Advil, a pain reliever, first developed in 1974, and then available in 1984 over the counter. Salicylic acid, that's found in aspirin as a pain reliever, was actually developed in 1915. And then sulfamethoxazole, which is one of the sulfa drugs, antibiotics, 1961. There's a whole list. There's over 30 different pharmaceutical personal care products that can be analyzed for. Some of the newer ones are like these synthetic sugars, saccharin, you know, these other compounds that have been introduced. So we're looking for a variety of these compounds. And if there are any questions at any time, just go ahead and ask them. Okay.
Patrick, how about estrogen?
Estrogen, yeah, that is one that that has been identified. We haven't found it as much as, say, as caffeine or acetaminophen or sulfamethoxazole, but estrogen-related drugs, definitely. So this kind of just, this bar plot shows several different chemicals, some of the more common ones that are found in wastewater effluents, and acetaminophen, caffeine, sulfamethoxazole, bisphenol A, carbamazepine, DEET, methadone, salicylic acid. And then on the y-axis is the aqueous or the water solubility in milligrams per liter or parts per million. And 1 part per million is equivalent to 1 second in 11.6 days, just for scale. Now, the importance of knowing this solubility, if you're concerned how these chemicals are going to behave in the environment, the higher the water solubility, the higher the mobility the chemical's going to be in an aquifer system. So if you had, like, for example, acetaminophen, which has about 12,780 milligrams per liter as its aqueous or water solubility, that's going to be relatively mobile if it's introduced into an aquifer system, as compared to, say, for example, carbamazepine, which has an aqueous solubility of about 18 milligrams per liter. Now, overall, these are really high solubilities for contaminants. So acetaminophen, caffeine, sulfamethoxazole are typically what we find, but we find these other constituents, including methadone, and a lot has to do how much is actually introduced, you know, into a wastewater treatment plant, because a lot of these do not break down. They're what's called recalcitrant. They're very stable and they don't biodegrade. So they're going to be in the environment for a while. But you know, acetaminophen in Tylenol, what you take 200 milligrams per liter of Tylenol, and we're looking at 1 million times lower, you know, in parts per trillion concentrations. So, you know, to evaluate, you know, the human toxicity is one thing, but where these really affect the environment is with amphibians and other, you know, organisms, and they're called endocrine disruptors. So they can disrupt the biochemistry of, say, amphibians, where, for example, you might have an increase or a conversion of male to female amphibians, such as frogs. That's where, you know, the impacts have been observed. And in Europe, the scientists have done a lot of work over several decades regarding pharmaceuticals and personal care products. Okay, Andy. So here's a map of Los Alamos, and I just wanted to show this. Over on the west side, you'll see the 001 outfall. That's for technical area 3. That's one of the major, that is the largest wastewater treatment plant discharge that goes into Sandia Canyon, and we sampled right below the discharge. Then we have the Los Alamos County Wastewater Treatment Facility in Pueblo Canyon. Several plants have been there since the 50s. And then the White Rock wastewater treatment facility, which their treated effluent discharges into Lower Mortandad Canyon and flows into the Rio Grande. So we have Los Alamos that's discharging into Sandia Canyon. Usually that surface water flow, and it's been cut back somewhat. Very rarely does it flow beyond the lab boundary as surface water flow. It infiltrates and provides recharge to the aquifers. And then the bio wastewater treatment plant flows into Pueblo Canyon, and that flows onto Pueblo de San Ildefonso land. And so all these effluents, they're within the state and the federal requirements for nutrients, like total dissolved solids, nitrate, etc. It's just these other chemicals such as the pharmaceuticals or personal care products, which there are no real standards developed as of yet, from what I understand. So we're looking at much lower concentrations, in the parts per trillion. Okay, Andy, next slide. So I'm just going to show you the results of sampling the Espanola wastewater treatment plant, Los Alamos, which is the bio plant, Lindleine wastewater treatment plant, White Rock and the Santa Fe River wastewater treatment plant. And again, as a reminder, we're looking at nanograms per liter or parts per trillion, and 1 nanogram per liter is equivalent to 1 second in 31,688 years. And so how we read this bar plot, for example, for acetaminophen, we did 2 sampling events, either in 2015, 2016, 2017, at these 5 different facilities. And for Espanola, Los Alamos, Lindleine, very little concentrations of acetaminophen. Those are the green, so you can just barely see their values. And then I actually have the numerical values there shown on the on this bar plot. So what we did find is sulfamethoxazole at the first and the second sampling events, where we have 900 and 990 nanograms per liter at Espanola. And then at Los Alamos, 1,000 and 1,500 nanograms per liter of sulfamethoxazole. And then Lindleine had much lower, 100 and 140 nanograms per liter. And then White Rock, 910 and 620. And then that was comparable. The White Rock wastewater treatment plant at the time we sampled was comparable to the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant with the first sampling event at 920 nanograms per liter, and then 780. And then carbamazepine, which is a medication, I believe, for seizures, lower concentrations, but what really stood out here out of these 3 were sulfamethoxazole and carbamazepine for when we sampled it. And you would expect to find variability if you really wanted to capture how these chemicals vary in daily discharges. Need a lot more data because it would vary daily. Okay, Andy, let's go to the next slide. So now we're looking at caffeine, dilantin, and methadone. So caffeine, we got to have our caffeine to keep us sharp. Dilantin is a seizure control medication, and methadone is a synthetic, is a chemical for to get people off of certain opiates like heroin. So when we look at these, we see that we measured caffeine, dilantin, methadone at Espanola at varying from 23 nanograms per liter up to about 500 nanograms per liter for those 3 different compounds. And then Los Alamos, a little lower concentrations, a little more of the dilantin compared to caffeine and methadone. And then Lannel, the lowermost there. And then at White Rock, what really struck us was how high the caffeine was at 7,500, 8,800 nanograms per liter. And I get it, you know, people love coffee. And then dilantin and methadone, and then the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant. So we found, you know, these 3 chemicals, pharmaceuticals, you know, at the 5 different sampling stations, wastewater treatment plants. And so the Espanola, that's what discharges into the Rio Grande, Los Alamos into Pueblo Canyon, Lannel into Sandia Canyon, White Rock into Lower Mortandad Canyon, which does flow perennially into the Rio Grande, and then the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant. Okay, Andy, next slide. And then let's see, we have DEET, fluorextine, which I think is a statin drug, and meprobamate, which is another seizure control medication. And really, we detected these at the 5 sampling stations, but what stood out during the time of sampling was what we found at White Rock, higher concentrations there. And, you know, at Los Alamos, it's people get out, they hike, they use a lot of sunscreen, and that's probably the main source of the DEET. Fluorextine, you know, as a statin drug. And then meprobamate, you know, what's interesting, these really can vary depending on the time of sampling, and then just finding mainly, you know, kind of similar at the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant. All right, Andy, next slide. So what's in the groundwater? So if you have a wastewater treatment plant treated effluent and it's discharging, and if it's discharged for 50 or 60 years, and if it's thousands of gallons per day, depending on how much water is flowing out of that discharge and the depth to the groundwater, then groundwater potentially can become contaminated. And so at Los Alamos, basically, there's 3 aquifer systems at Los Alamos. One is a very shallow one, which is called an alluvial aquifer. And that's what you'd have just below like the Santa Fe River, where you have unconsolidated sediments, and that depth to the water might be, you know, less than 20 feet. And it's just unconsolidated sediments. So alluvial aquifers can form, you know, just beneath where you have, you know, wastewater treatment effluents, other effluents, or certainly below natural flowing streams, perennial and ephemeral. And then there's another aquifer type at Los Alamos is called perched intermediate depth zones. And those aquifers can occur from 200 to 700 feet below ground surface. Then we have our regional aquifer, which is the aquifer that is underneath the Rio Grande Basin, Rio Grande Rift, and that extends from Colorado down to El Paso. And that water is where that's the source of drinking water for a lot of communities. Los Alamos, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and then down to El Paso. So what's shown here in the yellow are the perched intermediate zones, and each number represents a sample result. And on the y-axis is the concentration in nanogram per liter. And these are called box and whisker plots. And it's a really useful way to look at the distribution of the concentrations. So here's sulf-methoxazole in groundwater at Lannel, sampled between 2015, 2017. And the lowermost bar, and you'll see a number 2 for the yellow there, that represents the 10th percentile. And the bottom of the yellow rectangle is the 25th percentile. And then the median is the 50th percentile. And the upper bar, where it says 77 over on the side, is the 75th percentile. And then the upper bar is the 90th percentile. So what this shows here is for all our detections of sulfamethoxazole, it ranged from about 2 to 130 parts per trillion or nanograms per liter, where most of the values were in the yellow box between 8 and 75 nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. So that's in the groundwater, and that is sourced from the treated wastewater effluent that was in the Sandia Canyon from the Los Alamos, from Lannel. And those are the wells that we had sampled there within Lannel property. And then the next bar to the right, okay, it's the same thing, box and whisker plot, but this is in the regional aquifer, where this aquifer is down about 1,000 feet below the canyon bottoms or on the mesa tops, about 1,200, 1,300 feet below the mesa tops here. And then we see here that we had measured sulfamethoxazole ranging from 1 part per trillion up to about 69 parts per trillion. So what this shows is if you have a discharge from a treated wastewater effluent, and these chemicals have been used for 50 or 60 years, over time, they can work their way down through the rocks and provide recharge to the aquifers. And I want to point out too that with this, these samples had nitrate concentrations above background, below the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million. Nitrate is nitrogen. And usually if you know you have a wastewater treatment, domestic wastewater treatment effluent, and you find nitrate, there's a pretty good chance you're going to find these other chemicals. And it's just the way it is. And so let's go to the next slide, Andy. And then, so let's look at some data along the Rio Chama and Espanola. So we sampled the Rio Chama at State Route 74, that's right above the confluence with Chama and the Rio Grande, and then the Rio north of Espanola, the Rio south of Espanola, the Rio at Otto Bridge, and the Rio at the Buckman Diversion Facility. And what we see here, are fairly low concentrations in the Rio Chama, slightly higher values on the Rio north of Espanola. And that could be due to other wastewaters, perhaps the Taos wastewater treatment plant, maybe septic tanks, I don't know for sure. And then kind of similar concentrations north of Espanola and south of Espanola, but seeing a little increase in sulfamethoxazole at Otto Bridge at the time, we did the sampling. So it's going to take the surface water, a certain amount of time to flow from Espanola down to the Otto Bridge. So even though these were sampled on the same day, they're kind of representing different times, for the water. And then the Rio at the Buckman Diversion, sulfamethoxazole at about 8.3 parts per trillion. So that kind of shows what's in the Rio Grande. Let's go to the next slide, Andy. Okay, and then here just shows at the Santa Fe wastewater treatment plant sampled in 2016, 2017. I want to thank Alex for granting access, and we shared these data with the city of Santa Fe, and I gave a presentation a couple years ago to the city of Santa Fe with these data. And so how we read this is the first green one at the top is acetaminophen, and 2016, 41 parts per trillion measured, and then in 2017, 2.5 parts per trillion. The ones that we found the most were carbamazepine at 320 parts per trillion or nanograms per liter, 2016, and then in 2017, 280 parts per trillion for carbamazepine. But the one that really stood out was the sulfamethoxazole, you know, these antibiotics, 920 parts per trillion in 2016, 780 in 2017. And then trimethoprim, we measured that at 400 parts per trillion in 2016, the purple bar, and then 410. So you know, some variations, but, you know, identifying the same compounds, sampling, you know, in 2016, 2017. Okay, Andy, and then looking at in 2016 in April, we sampled the wastewater treatment plant, Santa Fe, and then the Santa Fe River at Tortilla Peak Road. And basically we found the same compounds from released, you know, in the treated effluent from the wastewater treatment plant to in the Santa Fe River, but usually lower concentrations, so there could be some dilution. There could also be other sources depending if septic tanks, effluent in La Cienega, you know, Carl, if that's potentially, if that's close to the river, and if there's septic tank effluent that gets into the alluvial groundwater or the Santa Fe River. So, you know, there could be a surface water source, certainly the wastewater treatment plant. And if groundwater is contaminated and that groundwater is is discharging to the Santa Fe River, depending on certain times of the year. Now, again, for these like acetaminophen in Tylenol, you know, you take 200 milligrams per liter Tylenol, and we're measuring 41 per trillion, we're measuring 6 million times lower concentrations than what we're actually consuming. So, but you know, they are anthropogenic. The only ones of these that can occur naturally are the salicylic acid and aspirin, and they're associated with willow trees. Okay, next. So what we learned here is that this investigation, we identified it, pharmaceutical compounds, personal care products, surface water and groundwater at Lannel and surrounding areas, the Rio Grande, south of and north of Espanola, and then the city of Santa Fe, their wastewater treatment plant, and that treated sewage effluent and groundwater at Lannel likely contain the pharmaceuticals, personal care products. It makes sense. If you look for like nitrate or chloride or other constituents that that pass through, you know, the treated effluent, and that's recharging the groundwater. If you have nitrate, and especially like with septic tanks, you could have pharmaceuticals present there because we consume them, we pee them out, and we flush them down. The pharmaceuticals, personal care products are excellent groundwater tracers for identifying contaminant sources. Where did this water come from? So if you find pharmaceuticals, nitrate, then one common source is treated effluent from wastewater treatment plants. And then NMED will continue to monitor pharmaceutical compounds. The DOE Oversight Bureau is still collecting these, collecting water samples and getting a, you know, continuing this investigation. Okay, thank you. That's basically it. There's some supplemental material. Are there any questions or comments?
I have a question, Patrick.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's just an incredible overview.
What an addition. Yes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And
And did it make sense? Did I present it to where I'm not zooming into the molecules and all that stuff?
oh, absolutely. No, no, no. And of course, it's always fascinating to see who's drinking more coffee. Yeah, no, absolutely. One of my questions is, how often will you be sampling? When you say it will be ongoing, do you all have a schedule for that?
Well, at Lannel, they sample, I think quarterly or annually, depending on their budget. This is the DOE Oversight Bureau. Lannel is not doing this sampling, but they're aware of the results. When I was with the DOE Oversight Bureau from 2013 to 2017, I presented these data to them and to Los Alamos County. I'm now in the Groundwater Quality Bureau in Santa Fe. But hopefully, and I know the city of Santa Fe has looked at these as well. And so it's, depending on the budget, there are emerging contaminants and they should be characterized.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Patrick. I mean, this to me is just another like educational thing that we now have on recorded and available for people to look at. I think this is just a really great addition to our whole cause, and what we're trying to do is to understand what's going on with the river. So, Andy, do you want to do a real quick thing on the educational committee? What would you like to do?
Can I just ask one question before that, and which is a very quick one? So is this the same presentation, Patrick, that you gave about 3 years ago to the collaborative? It looks a little different.
It's a little different.
Okay, thanks.
I really wanted to give a presentation on PFAS, but the state is in litigation with the Air Force and there is no external discussion of PFAS. That's what we've been instructed.
Oh, but still, that's good to know about the PFAS. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, but it's basically the same one, but it was, I thought there would be new people here, that would hear it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, same one,
Yeah,
Bob.
no, thank you.
Good memory.
Got it recorded too, which is really nice.
Yeah,
absolutely. Andy?
Cool. No, I don't have anything to add except for the fact that we'll be working on trying to coordinate with the River Commission of the city and see what kind of political will we can generate. And that's something that you were talking about too. So we'll be working.
Excellent. Well, thanks to everybody. This has been one of those really informative moments, and another step. And we look forward to the December meeting for further discussion. But thanks to everyone for attending today. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Carl.
Hey, Patrick.
Yes.
Patrick, are you aware of any, I understand there's going to be some groundwater sampling occurring at the airport at the old National Guard area for PFAS. Do you know when that will take place?
Bill, I don't know the specific details, but there is the U.S. Geological Survey is undergoing some reconnaissance sampling, but the guy to get in touch with is Andy Yoakum, and it's like, who's it? Brad Yoakum? There's a country singer.
White.
Dwight Yoakam.
Dwight Yoakam, yeah. Bakersfield, I remember that. And Andy Yoakum in the Drinking Water Bureau, Bill, would be the guy to call and ask.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Bill, if you can't get his number, just call me and then I'll get it to you. But I know Andy is aware of that, and I think they're gonna try to do that sampling.
I actually heard that it won't be done until the end of this year or early next year.
Okay, thank you, Alex. That's perfect.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks,
everyone.
Safe out there.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you for